He's Bob Costas, the Hall of Famer. He will visit the 92nd Street Y in New York City this Sunday. That'll be May 11th at 7, and a potpourri of topics, I'm sure, over his 40-plus years in the business, and online and in-person tickets available at 92ny.org. Bob, how are you today?
I'm good, Dan, and rest assured I will not make a penny off whatever the 92nd Street Y accrues from this appearance.
Okay.
But they do great stuff there, not to belabor it. You could actually see someone in conversation with Larry David or Paul Simon, that kind of thing. And now I guess they've dipped down in rank. They didn't have anybody else for Mother's Day night, so it's me this time.
Pirates have fired their manager.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, could you do a two-tiered system and maybe have, and it's the haves and the have-nots, could you do relegation maybe where, bottom half team, maybe they move up or what? I mean, what are you supposed to do in Pittsburgh, once great baseball town?
The only thing that brings to mind that would be comparable, remember, I'm old enough to remember, you were a younger child if you were here at all, but in 1967 or whatever it was, when the NHL expanded, you had the original six, and all the expansion teams went into one division, 6 and 6. And that actually sparked a hockey craze in St. Louis because the Blues were the worst of that the best of that second division. And they went to the Stanley Cup finals twice and acquitted themselves well, even though they lost. So that's the only comparable thing I can think of. But here, I think, is the real answer. If you're the Pittsburgh Pirates, and if you're a long-suffering fan, and you're right, they have a great baseball history. They have one of the best ballparks in the major leagues, and they flounder constantly. Think about this, though, Dan. There are 10 teams in the two central divisions in the major leagues. Only one of them is in the top half of payrolls. That's the Cubs at 10th. Next is the Tigers at 17th. Half of the 6 playoff teams last year in the American League came from the AL Central. The Tigers, the Royals, and the Guardians, and the Twins, who have now had the trapdoor open on them, but the Twins were barely outside that group. They were alive in the last week. Other than the Cubs, in theory, who's going to greatly outspend the Pirates in the National League Central? One of the things that mitigates the admittedly large payroll gaps in the major leagues is the third wild card. Whether you like it or not, you can say, hey, if we can win 85, 86 games, we got a chance to get into the postseason. And the history shows even the Dodgers, they lost to the Padres 2-3 years ago. They lost to the Diamondbacks, and they were down 2-1 to the Padres last year before they rallied to win the division series. It's not a guarantee that the best teams and the highest payroll teams make it through to the World Series if you can just get into that tournament. So I don't want to be harsh, but what's the Pirates' excuse? They play a huge percentage of their games within the National League Central with other teams that aren't running away from them payroll-wise, and you've got a second and third wild card. You don't have an excuse to be this bad, this consistently for this long.
Yeah, and I don't know what Derek Shelton was supposed to do. You do have a couple of players, and we tend to look at these teams, some of these teams, and we go, boy, who's he going to be with his next contract? Paul Skeens is not going to retire a Pittsburgh Pirate, which
no, it's not.
It's a shame, but that's just modern day baseball here.
Yeah, it is. On the other hand, if Derek Shelton was lucky enough to have management like the Colorado Rockies have, and this is not a knock on Bud Black at all. Bud Black is a very respected baseball guy as a pitching coach and as a manager, and he had the Rockies in the playoffs several years ago, but they start out with no chance. They leave spring training with no chance, but they don't have the benefit, if you want to call it that, of being in a weaker division. They're in a division where the other 4 teams vary from good to very, very good. And they're playing a huge number of their games in that division. And they're like 180 games out, even though it's only a 162-game season.
They got 6 wins so far.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the timing of Shohei Otani coming back to pitch. And if you're the Dodgers, you don't want to push this. And if you're Otani, I know that that's your identity, but still, I mean, there's a real risk here. If I'm the Dodgers, I don't want to lose you as a hitter. And having you as a pitcher, I may not need you as much as a pitcher, but I don't know if Otani's locked in and says, hey, but this is who I am. I'm the two-way player, and I want to continue to do this.
I think there is an element of that, and it's part of what leads him to sign with whatever team he signs with. Obviously, the Dodgers had the greater financial wherewithal and were able to structure the deal that worked. But part of it is I want to do both. So I don't think they can deny him that. But they do have this luxury. Whatever it is, the Dodgers are a great organization, but they have injuries to their pitching staff every year. Every team does, but they have them out of all proportion. They'll start out with 10 guys, all of whom could be in at least some team's rotation. Now 4 of them are healthy. And even when we get to October, we're throwing bullpen games in the playoffs. So I don't know what they're doing with their medical staff or their training staff, but at least they have this. They're so good, even in that division, that they can slow walk a lot of guys. Clayton Kershaw threw like 6-7 perfect innings the other night in the minor leagues. They're slow walking him back. And who knows? He may be a reliever for them rather than a starter. And maybe the answer for Otani is, we don't want you to go out there looking to throw 6 innings, which is the modern complete game. Maybe we use you out of the bullpen. And that's the way to do it. But they have the luxury of knowing they're going to be playing in October, and just trying to pull it all together by then. They don't have to pull it all together by the All-Star break.
Talking to Hall of Fame broadcaster Bob Costas, who haven't you interviewed? Or who have you interviewed you'd like maybe another sit down with?
Well, the Holy Grail has always been Sandy Koufax in sports. Sandy was always very, very gracious to me. I asked him a couple of times, this goes back more than 20 years, and he never had someone else make the call. He always called me back personally. And he said, if I ever do it, I'll do it with you. And after a while, I began to realize I'm at the front of a line that never moves. Thanks for the nice thoughts, Sandy. But he did do one thing with us, and I thought he might for this specific reason. All-Star game in Cincinnati a decade ago, and they named a Mount Rushmore of living baseball players. And it was Willie, Hank, Johnny Bench, and Koufax. And I said, Sandy, if it's just the 4 of you and you're talking amongst yourselves, will you do it? And he did. And he was great in that sit down, anecdotal, joking with the guys. You could see they were energized. And all I had to do was just toss it out there and then sit back and let them talk among themselves. So I think Koufax would be one of the guys in sports. Jack Nicholson, who's in the winter of his years now and seldom appears in public. But Jack Nicholson, fascinating guy, enormous star for 30, 40 years. He always said, I don't do television interviews. I'm a movie star. You leave your house, you go into a darkened theater, you pay your money, the phone doesn't ring, and you sit there and watch me on a big screen. Why do I want to be sitting with Johnny Carson while you're looking through your toes as you're lying in bed? But I'm not going to do that. It diminishes the mystique. So the only time you saw him on television regularly was sitting courtside at a Laker game. So it brings me to this. 1992 NBA Finals, Portland against the Bulls. And Nicholson is shooting Hoffa on site in Chicago. So he's Jack Nicholson. He can get good seats. They weren't at half court. They were on the baseline underneath one of the baskets. And Dick Ebersol and Terry O'Neill, who were the producers, they spot him there. And I'm not calling the games. Marv is calling the games. I'm upstairs at the old Chicago Stadium to do the pregame and the halftime. So they say, Bob, do you know Jack Nicholson? Well, I've met him. I don't know him that well. Go down and ask him if he'll come on at halftime. I'm like, this is the greatest fool's errand of all time. Don't you know that Johnny Carson just left the Tonight Show and he wouldn't go on the last month with Johnny Carson when people were lined up around the block to make one more appearance? Go down, you owe it to us. Go, okay, fine. So I schlep myself down and I wait for the 4-minute timeout and I walk up behind him. Dan, I swear, I tap him on his right shoulder and he turns around like this. And the first glimpse of him is like the first time you see him in The Shining. Face. And then he softens a little bit and he goes, I wish I could do a decent imitation. He goes, oh, hi, Bob. Jack, just play along here. They're watching. I'm supposed to ask you if you'll come on with us. And I swear this is what he said verbatim, except I'm editing one word. Bobby, you're a nice kid. You do good work. How can I put this? No effing way. So, Jack, I'll take that as a no. Enjoy the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Now I got to haul ass all the way around back in time for the halftime.
At least he was very respectful.
Yes, he was.
I told my audience to keep an eye on this because I think there's something there. When President Trump got together with baseball commissioner Rob Manfred, and this Pete Rose situation, it feels like this is something that Donald Trump wants to happen, to at least get Pete on the ballot.
Yeah.
And I think there's other things at play that the commissioner may want or need from the president as well. I think Pete's going to get on the ballot at some point, it feels like. What do you think?
Two things here. First, the ballot part. In theory, they'd have to put him directly into a veterans committee unless they change their rule.
Okay.
Because anyone who is more than 15 years removed from having played can't be on the ballot. And of course, if you were on the ballot for 10 years, then you wait a little while and they throw you into a veterans committee. Now, if they're going to take Pete off the restricted list or whatever it is, the ineligible list, then in theory, they could also say, wait a minute, he was never on the writers' ballot. Let's have the writers vote on it rather than 16 people in a veterans committee situation. By the way, if you're going to take Pete off on that basis, would you consider taking Shoeless Joe Jackson off on that basis? He was briefly on the writers' ballot and didn't make it, but you could put him up for consideration too. But those were sides. To your point, I don't know the specifics. I haven't talked with Commissioner Manfred about it, but baseball has an antitrust exemption. The Trump administration seems quite willing to interpret things their own way, or to pursue certain legal actions that others would not. So the antitrust exemption is important to baseball. It protected them greatly before Marvin Miller and company finally broke through and got rid of the reserve clause, but it still has some value to them. And then who knows, and I'm only speculating here, I'm not saying it's true, but obviously there are a great many foreign players in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
Does Trump's immigration policy perhaps in some way affect their comings and goings? I'm not saying it does, but these are all things that perhaps Manfred and Trump would be discussing.
Yep, that's how I see it. I think it's going to happen. At least, Pete posthumously is going to be on a ballot, whether it's the veterans or they decide to put him on the regular ballot, the writers' ballot. Good to talk to you again. Have fun this weekend. Thank you, buddy.
Bye.
It's Bob Costas, 92nd Street Y in New York City. That'll be 7 Eastern coming up this Sunday as Bob looks back on his 40-plus years in the business. Online in-person tickets available at 92ny.org.